Yes. Great. Just for the opening, can everybody that's comfortable turning on their camera? Can you turn on your camera? I think we have everybody's names this time. That's awesome. Great. So it worked out. So the I think the comments were sent to everybody with the little exercises, and I think you received them. Nassim, they were sent out Friday?
Yes.
Yeah. Did anybody not receive it? And if you didn't, could you put something in the chat so that we can make sure that we can follow up with you. For those who have received it and those who were here last week and have any questions or reflections from last week that we can get into before we get into new material, that would be great. So the first thing we're going to do is just have a little conversation about what happened last week to clarify things. And then we're going to go to the reading that was sent and for this week called Artfulness, which is from a book by Aaron Manning called The Minor Gesture. And when we're reading this, we're looking at this reading, I'm particularly interested in a couple of terms that will, I think, help us develop our language as we expand on what we were talking about last week with the territorial assemblage and our play with the camera as we move toward the editing software. And then in the third part of today's activity, we're going to look at a couple of examples of different editing techniques and think about different editing techniques. And then we're going to look at the actual mechanics of DaVinci, which a link was sent to everybody. And you don't have to use DaVinci, obviously. You can use whatever editing software you have access to or you like using. I like using DaVinci, and it's free, which is great, and you can do a lot of great stuff with it. And it's not free for a certain amount of time, and you get an enormous amount of capacity with the free version. So that's why I'm suggesting that. But the same mechanics essentially are used in DaVinci as used pretty much everywhere else. So that's going to be the guide for today. So first thing, reflection on last week. Second thing is the artfulness reading, and then third is it's editing. What I would like to do is to try to get through the discussion and a bit of the reading before our first break at the top of the hour. So given that, over to you. First, Paul got them and even did the homework. Fantastic. I'm glad you enjoyed the exercise. Bernard, reflection on last week's article. I had no idea where the author was going, nor did he end up with a clear conclusion. He just rambled on and on, using many examples from Anglo-Saxon or French literature, with which I'm not familiar. Found it a extremely difficult read. Totally. You know, with all readings and with all approaches, you know, you will resonate with them or not resonate with them. And you know, I resonate particularly with they're thinking about the plane of material and plane of composition, because I find that there's a distinction, not just in the academy, not just in university, but generally there's the distinction between those who think and those who don't. And there's some kind of privileged thing where those who think have some kind of privileged status, and those who don't think don't have a privileged status. And art is a place that is sometimes privileged because it's special. And sometimes, and even by the same people that privilege it because it's special, think of it in non-intellectual terms, as if art is not an intellectual exercise. And one of the things that I think that the authors are trying to do in that reading is they're trying to think about what thinking means in our practice, and they're trying to make a different argument for thought. And if you could extract a definition from that article about what thought is in art making, it's the process of engaging with the world, perceiving the world. And that means, from their perspective, they have described themselves as what might be called radical empiricists, which means that their perception of the world would include fantasies and dreams and beliefs and not just objects, not just straightforward objects in the world. And they're interested in presenting a language where art making is a kind of thinking that works at the plane of the material, which includes everything, which includes all of that, and then moves to the plane of material into what they call the plane of composition, which is for them that practice of thinking, the relationship between the plane of the material and the plane of composition. So that there's a kind of continuity and a kind of production of something new that continues to move thought. In cinema, Deleuze says that thinking in cinema is about thinking about movement or blocks of sensation in duration. And that for our conversation today is going to be really important. And when we get into editing, we're going to start to see what those blocks of sensation are. And why I want to start here, as opposed to some other technical reading of, say, about ethnographic film, for instance, is because there is, I think, a distinction between those people who use cameras and do the technical stuff and those people who are quote unquote philosophers and thinking. And what we're trying to do with research creation is recognize that creative work is already thinking in particular ways, and cinema is already thinking. What's my evidence for my starting point? Well, the evidence is that you just take film studies programs, for instance, read films. They don't make films. Production is done by technical people. And all of the people that I work with who have gone to film school, for instance, they go and learn to use cameras, but they don't think about, they don't get into the kind of philosophical conversations about cinema making, and they don't think about, for instance, research creation, the kind of things that we're interested in here. So and even in my graduate training, for instance, there was you spend lots of time reading stuff, and then, you're handed a, camera and go out and make something and then come back and then show it without thinking really deeply about what this process is that is thinking in cinema. There's enormous consequences to that until very, very recently. Let me give you an example. In my dissertation, for instance, where I was defending my PhD, I made a 5-minute film to show at the beginning of my dissertation defense. And at the end of screening the film, the chairperson of the committee said, "Okay, thank you," and then instructed the committee to not think about the film, because cinema at that time, and this is 2010, was not acceptable in the defense. So there is, and for those of you who are working in fine arts departments in different parts of the world, you may still run into the situation where you do creative work, and then the creative work needs to be described or written about in order for it to be legitimate, as if there's a continued distinction between the craft practice and then the thinking part, as if the quote unquote craft practice isn't already thinking. And what Deleuze and Guattari here are trying to do is make the argument that we have to stop thinking about this as a craft practice that's separate from thinking, and begin to try to develop a language where it's thinking in it's a particular form of thinking. It's a different form of thinking. Paul, what's bizarre?
That fact you had said about your defense committee not telling them not to pay attention to your 5-minute clip, which you probably put hours, weeks, maybe months into making, and then it gets like, don't pay attention to whatever Michael just showed you there.
Yeah,
that's bizarre. And 2010 wasn't that long ago.
No, it's not that long.
It's probably still happening today, to dare to do something a little different like that, and then just it's like, don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The U of A is an interesting example in this regard, and it's just a case of what's happening in many parts of North America as research creation is beginning to take hold. I was working with a graduate student recently whose supervisor said, "Yeah, absolutely, make a film for your graduate, for your capstone project for your master's degree." But then there was no support. It's as if you just, now it's okay, now go and do it, while nobody's trained to think about the application of thinking through cinema, which is the point of these workshops. And I know this is, like, for some of you, this may be a bit of a rub that I'm starting with a philosophical reading at the beginning instead of getting into the technical stuff. But what I want to try to do, and I'm going to just do it over and over and over again, and I'm going to try to make the point that there are writers who are trying to produce language that's going to help us to this is just going to happen. There are writers that are trying to give us a language to not justify, but I have to be frank with you. For those of you who are in the academy, there is still a justificatory thing happening. Like, this digital cinema is still emerging as a practice, and there's still lots of people in the academy who you need to explain this to, and part of this workshop, to underline what we talked about at the very beginning, part of this workshop is working towards decolonizing educational institutions. And I'm not saying that digital cinema is the way to decolonize the academy. It's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is it's a contribution, because it allows new forms of collective thinking that can introduce new ways of thinking into the academy, which has been dominated by text as the only way of thinking. And if we can convince our supervisors and our colleagues and our chairs and our deans, and most importantly, to get back to Paul's point, the graduate studies faculty who make the rules for what a defense is, then we get into a situation where we can begin to expand what is possible in thinking in a university. And this is a, I know fully, to go back to that committee, I know fully that there are probably all of the committee wanted to engage with that film, but there were rules that they had no say in that were determining their relationship to me and to the film, right? So now that I've been in the academy for a while, I understand these rules. And part of doing these workshops is to work with you, to work with your colleagues and your supervisors to begin to think about expanding what's possible. Yeah.
Just briefly, I spent some time at U of A, and you and I can talk all about that some other time personally, but there was a committee, and the committee was in total fear of what an external advisor would think of the committee and decisions of the committee and the candidate. And it was like, and that'd be someone who'd read some thesis, maybe the night before, and then grill you to death on it. And everyone was terrified of, there's layers of fear and worry. Anyway.
Yeah.
Again,
and
another story, another time.
Totally. But it's to the point, and I think a lot of us are going through it or have gone through it. And it's, it's a very rule-bound institution, and we're doing our best collectively to kind of make sense of it. Bernard asked a question and then said, forget it, it's not relevant, but I think it is. But where do you start? Yeah, exactly. Where do you start? The problem with communication is that you have to pick a starting point. I would like to do both things simultaneously, because that's the way they happen in my head, and that's the way they happen in the world. Multiple things are happening simultaneously. When I was a musician, I tended to practice. I tended to spend more time on my weaknesses than on my strengths. And I like that approach, and I tend to continue with that approach. So I like to start with the philosophical readings, because I think they're the weak side of the technical stuff. We have more energy theoretically at the beginning than we will do later. The technical stuff, you can watch tens of thousands of YouTube videos that will show you how to do everything. You don't need me to learn how to use the editor. So what you will not find on YouTube is a way of connecting the emerging philosophical literature around research creation to the technical side. And for those of you who have read Foucault, for instance, Foucault makes a big distinction about the tension in Western thought that emerges when what he calls the episteme and the techne are separate and are kept separated. And the episteme is the thinking bit. The techne is the technical bit. Now, the point he makes is those two things are not separate, that the episteme and the techne are mutually constituting. And in cinema, the technical stuff has become separate from the thinking stuff, and the thinking from the technical stuff. And what we're trying to do is put them together. Great. Okay. Shall we move on to the reading? Yes. Take that as a yes. So in artfulness, so this book, The Minor Gesture, so I should start out by saying Aaron Manning is an artist, dancer, installation artist, fashion designer, and a philosopher. And Manning starts with creation first, and then engages creation in philosophy. And in very much the same way that Deleuze says about his coming to cinema, he came to cinema at the same time as he was studying philosophy. And he was, his thing was that he was in his classes, and they were talking about philosophical concepts, and those concepts always seemed to be immobile. They always seemed to not move. And then he'd go to the cinema, and everything was in movement. And his engagement with the cinema is not an addition to philosophy. He takes philosophy to the cinema to try to think about how he can make philosophy move. Movement is what Deleuze and Guattari are interested in. Aaron Manning, equally, and in that lineage, is interested in movement and interested in, as she says at the very beginning, in the art of time. So from the first two paragraphs, she thinks a little bit about how art is defined. And just kind of a common sense thing. We know that, we go to an art gallery, the stuff's sitting on a wall. We go to an installation, the thing is there. We go to the cinema, and we see the movie, and we see the poster at the beginning, and we're giving the distinct, or we buy a CD or download a song. This is the work, right? And in musicology, there's a lot of focus on the work, and those concepts tend to, as Manning says, it tends to make things seem immobile. So art seems to be immobile. What Manning tries to do is, at the bottom of the first page, I would therefore like to propose a new definition of art as practice that begins not with the object, but with what else art can do. I want to propose that we engage first and foremost with the manner of practice and not the end result. So my approach to cinema making is in the process of making cinema. And my thinking with the cinema is in the process of making cinema. Last week, we were thinking about territoriality. And to underline what the conversation was last week, Deleuze and Guattari make a distinction between perception and then what they call the percept and affect. And we can think about this really simply. When you go out to take your camera, for instance, you're looking around, you're engaging with the world, you're fully engaged in perception. You take your camera out, you film something. You get an audio visual clip. The purpose of the activity, when I asked you to go and play the clip and then sometime later come back and watch the clip, is I wanted to get to what Deleuze and Guattari point to as the most significant thing that cinema does. And that's introduce time into thinking. So when you go and you take an audiovisual clip in the process of living in the world as you're seeing it, you begin to do what Aaron Manning will call later in this reading, compose a memory of the future. And this, we'll get to it in the reading, but I want you to just hold that memory of the future idea in your head, because it's something that will point to a little bit in a really important way about the gap, the little space in between the plane of material and the plane of composition. Because when you're looking through the camera, you are already thinking, and you're already thinking in a particular way. And then when you come back to it, when you watch it later, you are, you're not rewatching something that you experienced. You're able to see and experience the percept and affect of the movement of time in the clip that you took. And then you can experience that movement of time in the clip. You don't experience the movement, the flow of time in the same way in perception as you do in the clip that you collected. And that, for Deleuze and Guattari, is one of the most, maybe the most important aspect of cinema thinking, is that it's blocks of sensation in duration, and time emerges as a subject. Now, that time, I think it's important to think about that what that time is. And I think it's part. It has to do with the what else that cinema can do. Here's a for instance. I made a film called John Ward Hannum is a Poor Man, and at the beginning of the film, I had a technical error at the beginning of when I was making the film. When I shot it, I was using a still camera lens on my cinema camera, and the difference between a lens that's designed for still cameras and a cinema lens is that the focusing on a cinema lens is like you can turn the barrel of the lens a lot further than you can with a still camera lens, because with a still lens, you have your camera in a spot and you focus and you get it right and then you click it. But in cinema, everything's moving. And one of the consequences of using a still camera lens is it's really hard to focus when the aperture is really wide. And what that means is there's a lot of light coming in. And because there's a lot of light coming in, there's this funny kind of perspective thing that's happening through the lens. So what happens is, well, I'll just show you the beginning of the film, and then we'll talk a little bit about this. Okay.
Don't say anything rude, Bob. Okay. Oh, then I have absolutely nothing to say. Exactly. Now we're like the two stooges. Leslie, where did we park? I actually forgot he was coming. Till I walked down the stairs, I forgot. I am a poor man with nothing to give. Now get old.
So what happened at the beginning of this? So when I first shot that, I was like, I can't use that. Like that's just garbage. I look back at it that night and I was like, this is absolute garbage, because it's just terrible. It looks terrible. Even though the situation was hilarious, we're in a hotel and we were leaving in the morning and they forgot where they parked their vehicle, and then we were wandering around a parking lot for 10 minutes trying to find where they parked the vehicle. So I thought it would be funny just to use it because it was funny. But later, as I was making the film, the inability to focus on the subjects actually became much more important to me for the beginning of the film. It was like I don't know these two guys particularly well. And it's the process of them coming into focus is actually something that actually became for me, not exactly a metaphor, but let's call it a metaphor. It became the process of coming into focus over time. And starting from the kind of really bright, kind of out-of-focused, funny, wobbling, moving around thing became for me something that helped to actually give the film some forward momentum at the beginning. It's like we're attempting to come into focus and we're like struggling, and there's this kind of affect, I think, for viewers that like get into focus, like just that kind of desire to get into focus. And that affect is not something that was intentionally composed, but it's something that as I was thinking about the editing process, it's something that moved from the plane of the material, that the plane of material in this case was just a poorly shot clip, into the plane of composition. Okay, all right. So nothing changed in the materiality. There's no change in the materiality as it moves from the plane of material into the plane of composition, but there's a change in the thinking. Bruce, did you have a question? Cool. Okay, Bernard says, I'm not always thinking when I look through the viewer of my camera. For example, when I register a dramatic action that I haven't seen before, the thinking comes when I watch it as a result. Right. I'm going to disagree with you, Bernard, and I'm going to say that there's already a process of thinking that's happening as soon as you look through the camera. And now, the kind of thinking that we're talking about, and this is a really important question, the kind of thinking that's happening is not the kind of conceptual thinking that that you're seeing when you quote unquote register a dramatic action. That's a kind of conceptual thinking. Just like, that is dramatic. I am recognizing a dramatic moment here, and I'm recognizing it for its dramatic, for the dramatic moment that it is. Yeah, absolutely. But you're already importing a kind of concept of drama into what you're seeing at that moment. But there's another form of thinking that's subtler, and that is necessary to develop, and it's related to what Aaron's talking about on the second page. So let's go back to the reading here, because even though I didn't get the focus on that opening scene when I shot it, I kept shooting it anyway, and because I was reaching out for something. And I want to heighten your play with the reaching out. Aaron says at the top of the second page, art as a way of learning acts as a bridge towards new processes, new pathways. To speak of a way is to dwell on the process itself, on its manner of becoming. It is to emphasize that art is before all else a quality, a difference in kind, an operative process that maps the way towards a certain attunement of world and expression. Art as way is not yet about an object, about a form or a content. In Bernard's example, it's not yet about dramatic. So the dramatic in that instance, the recognition of the dramatic is already to recognize a form. All right. It's still on its way. And as such, it's deeply allied to Bergson's definition of intuition as the art or the manner in which the very conditions of experiences are felt. And this is the important sentence for me in this paragraph. Intuition both gets a process on its way and acts as the decisive turn within experience that activates a productive opening within time's durational folds. Intuition crafts the operative problem. When Aaron uses the term intuition, I want you to think of the camera. I want you to think of the process of looking through the viewfinder in your camera. Intuition is something that the anthropologist Jean Rouch, he calls it the cine trance. And for him, the cine trance is a way of being in relation to the camera and the world that draws, that acts as a kind of process that musicians have often called flow. It's as if the subjectivity becomes somehow dissolved, maybe, or secondary. Your self-awareness of self-consciousness becomes secondary, and you get in tune with the flow, or let's say the rhythm. I like to think of it as the rhythm of the encounter, whatever this process is. And so intuition is the intuition is the way that Aaron is talking about. So whether it's and I'm sure you all have had experiences in whatever medium you work in where this is happening, and this is a practice. So the idea of intuition is development of intuition from Bergson's perspective is a practice. It's a technique. And it's a technique of recognizing the let's just call it going with the flow for the time being. It's, you know, going with the flow of the idea. Let's call that intuition for the time being, because that leads to really important things. One of them is, you know, I'm going to go back to John Wartham as a poor man as an example, because I was driving along when I wasn't actually in the this film was being edited, and there was this moment, like there was this feeling that I was trying to find, and as a transition shot, and I was driving along southern Alberta, and I had my camera with me, and I got to one spot, and I handed the camera to the person in the passenger seat, and I rolled down the window and I said, "Film that," meaning the you know, what we were passing by, and then I set that film to music, and because it said something important to me about John. And at the time when I was filming it, I was open to a particular kind of rhythm, particular kind of visual rhythm that I was trying to find. And this is what happened.
I wasn't born blue blood. I was born blue collar, like my dad and granddad. I'm gonna follow. There's no money here. You gotta earn every dollar. I wasn't born blue blood. I was born blue collar. My daddy was a farmer with acres of land. And he cleared all the fields with a horse in his hands. That pile of stones at the section's edge stands as his monument. I wasn't born blue blood, I was born blue collar, like my dad and granddad. I'm gonna follow. There's no money here. You gotta earn every dollar. I wasn't born blue. I was born blue.
Now, the shot. So I want to show you how this works. So there's this shot here. We move from setup. They go on stage, and then we move from this performance bit through this, and then back to the end of the show. So we have the beginning of the show and the end of the show is actually interrupted by this by that song and the and that shot. Now that shot does what Deleuze calls it's a time pressure shot. So there's two kinds of edits that are happening in this moment that we're going to think about when we go to do our editing later. There's a continuity between John walking on stage at the beginning and then coming off stage at the end. And that is interrupted by another shot that has nothing to do with the continuity of that action. The opening that I showed you, share screen again so you can see this. So that opening that I showed you, so 511. So this.
We could just stay here a while, wrapped up in the quiet light. We could sail away to Jamaica.
So that kind of edit is called a continuity edit. And
We didn't see it.
Oh, you didn't see it?
No,
Oh.
I didn't.
Darn it. Can you see it now?
Try again.
Yes.
Yeah, I see the
Okay.
two guys. Yeah.
Here we go.
We could just stay here a while, wrapped up in quiet light. We could sail away to Jamaica.
So that's called a continuity edit. And what a continuity edit is to, you didn't see them walking through the hallway and then coming out on the other side of that door and picking up their instruments and getting set up and sitting on stage and starting to play. You didn't need to see all that because you saw them walking towards, walking down that hallway, walking through the door, and then that cut from the audience perspective. You made the leap yourself to say that there's continuity in the action. So that's a continuity edit. And it's very exciting when you make a continuity edit the first time, because you look at it and go, damn, that's cool. Because it's something that we are extremely used to seeing, but when you actually do it from the perspective of editing, it's actually, it forms a kind of magic when it happens. So you're going to enjoy that. And doing some continuity editing is something that I'm going to get you to do for next week. This second kind of edit, though, so we move from a continuity edit into what's called a montage. And this is a particular kind of particular kind because it puts two images together that are not related. Him on stage, those two guys on stage, and then the shot of the landscape of Southern Alberta, and then back to them on stage. Because when we get at the end of that shot, they're coming off stage, there is a passage of time that happens between them walking on stage and walking off stage. So that does form of kind that this shot in the middle is what's called a time pressure shot. And a time pressure shot is distinct from a montage. A montage, as I said, is when two clips are put together. That was the very beginning of cinema. Really conceptual cinema, or even just playful cinema at the beginning, had to do with a lot of montage work, and that was believed to be the core of what cinema was. And we're talking like the 20s. Continuity by the 40s or so began to completely replace that kind of abstract montage. Although we still see it lots. It's just not the core of action. A Russian filmmaker named Tarkovsky disagreed with montage work and said, the real action, the really interesting thing in cinema is time, and what he called time pressure. And in the title of his book that he wrote in the 70s or 80s, Tarkovsky called it sculpting in time. And what this shot does in between is that visually it creates a kind of location in Southern Alberta that attaches the main character of the film, John Ward Hannum, to that landscape in Southern Alberta. And I think, oops, sorry, I just changed the view on my side. So what I try to do is I try to take John and I try to locate him in Southern Alberta, and then I use one of his songs as the kind of the rhythmic and textual material that locates, when he sings, "I'm not blue blood, I was born blue collar," that locates him in the territory. Now, there's something that happens when you put music and visual images together. For those of you who have ever done that, there's another kind of montage that comes from that relationship, and this is not particularly well theorized. Like Eisenstein, the theorist who theorized montage and was a major Russian filmmaker from the beginning of cinema, He called putting sound to images, he called it vertical montage. And he had particular ways, he had particular rules about it. A filmmaker that I really like by the name of Les Blank, who does a lot of musical films, particularly Americana work. He called it thinking about, he said, putting visual and audio content together. When it works, he says something new is created. And that new thing is made up of, the video content and the audio content, but what emerges from it is not reducible to either of those things. Something new happens. So he thinks about audio material and visual material. He thinks of it as forming chords. So for those of you who are musically, have a background in music, think about it in that sense. Think about it as using different kinds of tonalities together to produce something new, something more complex, and that is not reducible to its components. And I was thinking, Bruce, I was thinking about your project. I was thinking about, that refrain that you were talking about last week of being in Fredericton, and thinking about what that refrain is like and how to compose that refrain. And I was thinking about that because I wanted to show you this, because this is something where I was trying to figure out how to locate John in a audiovisual way that can say something about his biography without saying John Ward Hannum was born in Lethbridge and blah 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 blah. But it's like, how do I go? Your question last week posed me to think for myself. How do I think about showing biography in my films? Because I don't like that the thing at the beginning. This is about this and this and this, and this is this is the person, because that's not what attracts me to it's not attracts me to people. That's not why I want to make films. I don't want to make films because I could just write that, right? There's something about the tonality, the texture, the feeling that that's really important. And for those of you who are just tuning in this week, Bruce in his graduate work is thinking about something really cool. Bruce, do you feel comfortable jumping in and saying a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm going to do essentially an ethnography, and I'm encouraged to do that. And one of my supervisors suggested that I incorporate a film, because I've written some film music. I worked as a composer and for commercials and features and whatever stuff, dockies and so on. So, but I have no idea how to approach it. Like, I don't have any visual material when I was a kid. That was a very long time ago, and so I've got to find up some kind of way to represent that makes sense. And this is like, and we're addressing it here, which is really cool.
Great. Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to show you, I wasn't planning on using this clip in this workshop because it has to do with animation, but I decided that to show you this, partly because of Bruce's question, and partly because when we're thinking about this kind of work, we don't have to limit ourselves to thinking about video that you shoot, right? You can use YouTube content, you could, work with an animator, you could do your own animation, you could do whatever you want. What we're interested in is thinking about audiovisual work as a way of thinking. In a film that I'm working on called Washboard Hank, the Paganini of the washboard. There's a there's just something about Washboard Hank that is he's kind of larger than life in really important ways. And I wanted to set a particular tone around Hank, because he's both almost cartoon-like. He's so kind of wild and expressive, but he's also probably one of the deepest thinkers about music that I've engaged with in really particular, in really exciting ways. So when we were talking about making this film together, he recorded an audio clip for me, and I sent the audio clip to an animator, and together we worked on the conceptual part of it, and then the animator did this for me. So this is the introduction of an unreleased film, so it's not finished, and the audio isn't finished yet, but it'll give you an idea of what's going on. Here you go.
I love being a musician. You know, music's been around for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, bone flutes have been discovered that were played up to 55,000 years ago by Neanderthals, using the same notes that we use today. When I play music and look out into the audience, I see a reaction and feel a bond between performer and audience. It's far more ancient, joyful, and important than any religion. Organized religion's been around for about 10,000 years. Music's been here for 40,000, 55,000 years. That makes music at least 4 times more important. When I play, I'm just paying homage to that tradition. Here we go. We're traveling across this country, don't you know? It'll take a lot of beer to get from there to here. It's beer can down the Trans Can. Here we go. Miles from town to town. Here comes a cop, better keep them down. Keep them down. We'll drive at the speed limit with our seatbelts on, and then we'll post the police when they're gone. Cause this beer can down the Trans Can. Here we go. Here we go. We're traveling across this country, don't you know? Don't you know? It'll take a lot of beer to get from there to here. This beer can down the Trans Can. Here we go. Cause we don't need no evidence on the floor. Every 100 miles or so, we'll write our names in snow. It's beer can down the Trans Can, here we go. Yes, it's beer can down the Trans Can, here we go.
Oh, okay.
Contrary to what you normally
We
do,
might,
that's fine.
again,
So when are we leaving
I don't
then?
know, but hell, we might take
What time is it?
Uber
How
over there,
far away is it?
How,
just so we don't have to worry about having a drink. So we'll just give you a call. Oh, it's 10 minutes to get there at the most.
I thought-
Okay, good. Good.
Okay,
All right.
so we'll leave.
Okay.
Okay,
relax.
love you.
6,
Bye.
leave at 6 in a half hour.
So the idea with that animation at the beginning was to, is not to create a biography of Hank. It's to produce an affect of Hank. There's when we were talking last week about percepts and affects, there's color selection, there's image selection, there's texture of the audio recording, there's the the shape of the letters that are used to spell out his name. I spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out the right typeface. That's like, what typeface feels like Hank to me? What typeface feels like this thing? Like, what does the little beer cans look like? Like, what does the instruments look like? And how do you entwine music into music into the screen, that then, like, the strings of the guitar or the strings of the banjo turn into the highway, and and that those the motifs of the stars, and which come up later in the video, in the film, and then that kind of energy. So to get to what you were talking about, Bruce, is like, what is when I was talking last week, was like, what does it feel like for you to sit in the living room in Fredericton in the 50s, early 60s. What's that refrain feel like? And then what are the textures that can elicit that, right? So that's when Deleuze and Guattari are talking about percepts and affects. This is precisely what they're talking about. I'm listing percepts that have relations to affects. Like the color is a percept, and the color has a feeling to me. So it's a percept with an affect. And it's that feeling that I think of in relation to Hank, which is why I chose that color. And like the string that we used has a particular stringiness, like a roughness, but like a rough texturedness. So we could have just, instead of using strings or instead of using cotton balls for clouds, we could have just cut the clouds out of paper. But it was really important for us to have the kinds of textural feelings that will elicit for me the way I feel about the time that was spent on that tour, so that this opening begins to unlock. It begins to produce what Deleuze and Guattari call a refrain, that then is like the core of the kind of emotional core of the entire work.
Yeah, I think you've honored the primitiveness, kind of
Yeah.
in a way that was like really cool, and it's evocative in some other kind of way that I can't verbalize for you.
That is what Deleuze and Guattari are talking about. That is the thinking that we're trying to encourage, right? If it was simple as saying, oh, this works because of these reasons, if it was simple as that, then perhaps we wouldn't need to think in this way. But the fact is, if we take cinema seriously, and if we take cinema seriously as a mode of thought, it's a mode of thought that doesn't duplicate conceptual thought. It's a mode of thought that expands that expands our realm of thinking. And this is not like we're discovering that we can think different. We already know we can think different. The process, this is not revolutionary for artists. But remember, ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to take seriously this as a mode of thinking and then do that decolonial work. So, in all of our processes, there's going to be, I hope, moments, I hope, in the workshop where you're going to hear us talk about or read something that underlines what you already feel.
So you're saying something in producing the film that can't be said another way. In other words, it's its own language. Let me just say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's let me give you another example from the film. There's Hank is an extremely kind of where to start? I want to go back to I want to think about the primitiveness that you were talking about and the materiality. There's a moment in this, there's a clip in this film that we'll watch and then we'll take a break, where I move from the making of a washboard into the playing of the washboard and into the sociality of a bunch of people playing washboard together. That to me makes an extraordinarily complex philosophical argument in a way that everybody can understand. All right, and I want to watch that clip, and then we'll take a break, because it's a great moment to underline this. And then I see that there's some questions, and we'll get them. Okay, does everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
a nice seat in air-conditioned comfort, well, come on right in. We're playing from 12 o'clock right through to 2 o'clock. So come on in, take a rest off your feet. And there's, what did you say? There's cold beer as well, folks. Yes, indeed. So thanks so much for right in here. Come on in and see the show. We got all kinds of tricks. But here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take the old Cineland. Yes, Steve. Oh, no, I can't. On Tessie's wedding gown, she ain't her fair hair, where burgers and lids around. Carol says, by golly, I'll mow the garment down. That guy back on Tessie's wedding gown. Don Paul skin goes all crying. No wonder no one saw it flying. The sheriff says, golly, I'll mow the garment down. That guy tobacco on Tessie's wedding gown. The old Reed organ played until it quivered. No wonder no one saw it delivered. Sheriff says, by golly, I'll kick him out of town. That guy works tobacco on Tessie's wedding gown. There it is. Play.
This is a really good example of time pressure. All right, so what in that clip, there's a whole bunch of things happening, right? So we have we go from the making of the washboard to the professional performance in front of the club. We go to Hank performing solo in front of that monument, and it's a bit of a monument because it's the last washboard company in North America that manufactures musical washboards, or washboards that are also musical. And then he moves inside. So we have that. So we have the time pressure shot of his performance. We have the montage shots, the continuity shots of the building of the washboard. We have the time pressure shot of him walking down the side of the washboard company, just him, strolling with the washboard. There's something about just the figure of him walking with the washboard on that street that appeals to me. And then a couple of quick continuity shots into the washboard company where he's playing with everybody. So we move from the materiality to the washboard, and we move towards the professionalization. We see the possibility of the washboard as a as a solo instrument that then, you know, classifies it as a performance instrument. And we also see the sociality that's possible in the community environment, and the way that Hank moves through all of those environments in a very short amount of time. The experience of watching that happen in such a short amount of time, and seeing the joy on people's faces and the engagement, and then feeling the, you know, the humor in what he does, and the kind of community bonding thing related to the materiality of the musical instrument, is something that can be communicated in 5 minutes in a video, and I think it's lasting. Much more difficult to write about. Question. How much of these stylistic choices are based on the filmmaker's feelings and associations versus the perceived or expressed feelings and associations of the subject, in this case, the musician of the film or the target audience? Tia, extremely great question. There's one of the things that you're setting up here is a bit of a binary between me as the filmmaker, and then the object of the musician or whomever it is that I'm working with, and then me as the filmmaker in relation to the audience. Let's start with just the production side, I guess, the territoriality side. If you watched any number of films of mine, you will see that there are certain things that are consistent, that would be, I guess, my stylistic preferences that emerge from editing. But you will also see significant differences in each of the films, and I would attribute those differences to what happens when you're working with the people that you're working with. There's a kind of, I like to think of this kind of work, reason why I call it Cineworlding, I like to think of this kind of work as a worlding practice that emerges from what happens when I enter into relationship into these worlds that these people are already building. I'm entering into Hank's world in this instance, in the same way that I entered into John Ward Hannum's world. So in that way, there's a kind of continuity of technique, in the sense that I am attempting to find the refrain of the world that they're producing, and then I try to using the practice of intuition that Aaron is talking about, try to get on board with that refrain. I try to vibrate, I guess, if you will. I try to vibrate on the same or a related frequency, and then allow that to inform my practice. So that to me is the really exciting part of the work, as opposed to the way it's theorized in ethnography. Is often like the ethnographer seems to be unchanged in the process, as if you're not also worlded. I'm worlded every time I go out on do it on the road to make a film with different people, and I come back different. So sometimes the film is kind of like a bit of I don't know, a travel log of that process. To what extent are they my choices? I don't know. I mean, obviously I chose to hit record, but there's an energy in the environment that is suggesting itself to me, and it's going with the intuition that Aaron is talking about, and how you go with that intuition, and that ultimately makes for what we call style, I think. So it's like honing the intuition to get what it is that you want to get. I think you're asking a really, really big question that I don't feel that we have the vocabulary quite yet for me to express my full feelings about it. So I'd like you to ask that later, again, so we can talk about it after we get through the filming process. So is it your relationship with the process of interaction that results in the choice of fluffy clouds opposed to is it your relationship with the process of interaction? Let me say yes for the time being. I think if I understand your question right, yes, it's the affect that fluffy clouds, that it's the affect that and it's not fluffy clouds, right? It's cotton balls. It's the affect of cotton balls being clouds that makes Hank make sense to me. Yeah, and I hope it makes sense to other people, and I have no idea if it does. And the research that I've done on viewing my films was to suggest something else. There's another very complex process going on when we get to people viewing our films, which we'll get to later. Yes, thank you. To generate the conditions. To generate the conditions, Soledad. Soledad, can you say more about that? To generate the conditions.
I think it's the continuation of her previous comment. I think it's
Sorry, I missed that. Yeah. You're here. You want to talk? Audio? Your audio's off, Soledad.
Let me see if I can.
There you go.
Can you unmute yourself, Soledad? I think she lost connection.
Don't have any audio. Yeah. Yes, I can hear you now. Yay! Okay, go ahead.
I'm doing a trick, so you could imagine what I was saying.
Yeah.
Workshop. No, I was trying to think about this. What Godard says, that we don't film issues, but we film ways of seeing.
Yeah.
So when we are filming something or someone, the thing is to create this space for the other to emerge, or the subject of the object to emerge. And for me, that's the clue for these Tia Julien's questions about if you are filming, who are you filming? Or I think it's about representation, what she's talking about. If you are representing your feelings, the subject feelings, or the audience feelings, I think it's not about representation, but creating this space for this relation to emerge. We are always relating with another, no? So we cannot represent anything. We can talk about this relationship. For me, it's interculturality. We went back to the other class. Sorry for my English.
Yeah, no, your English is brilliant. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's all about relationality, and the workshop, probably could be titled Relationality in Cinema, which I think is redundant for the kind of thing that we're trying to do. And more about creating relationships than representing. I think that's exactly right. Okay, it's
excuse me, I think Paul had a raised hand a long time ago. Paul, did you have a question?
I was just I'll just make a really short point, because I know everybody needs to have a tea break or washroom, but oddly, or ironically, or whatever, so our last class was Monday. On Tuesday, we're here at my cottage, my wife and I, and a friend of hers who I'd not met before, was coming to visit for 2 days. She's a librarian. My wife's a retired librarian. And this one, her name is Erin. Again, more irony with the author of your paper. Anyway, Erin is an artist. My wife is an artist too. She would never say she is, but she is a good painter. So Erin's got this thing. She's like, they spend the day together. I come home after biking all day and stuff, and she's got these rocks that she'd collected like around Ingonish area. And she was showing how she grinds them down. She's got this mortar and pestle, and she makes paint out of them, pigments, right? So I know people use lichen and plants and all that, but she's the first rock paint maker that I've ever seen. She's got this little container with all these different colors that she made, right? So my next question was to her, so have you got something that you painted to show us with? And guess what? She doesn't paint with the stuff. She spends hours and hours and hours doing this. And she even said, it's the process, Paul. I'm not interested in using the paint to paint with. And then I said, do you give this to anybody? And she said, no. And I thought, but when she left, she was going to leave my wife some of this stuff. She didn't even do that. It was just like, she really likes making the paint, and it's all about making it. And, you know, it's like, and there you are talking all about it. And I thought, oh my God, this is weirdly kind of karma. Anyway, it's neat stuff. And maybe someday she'll send her some as a Christmas present. I'll have a painting my wife will do for me, not you, Marcia. And then I'll post it somewhere, though I don't use Facebook, so I don't know how anyone will see it. But there it is.
Brilliant. That's an
I'm thinking she's the film that I should have been done, though. She's down in Yarmouth now, right? Doing all this.
You're gonna have to go for a drive, Paul.
I think so. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The process of relating to rock and transforming it into paint. Yeah, exactly.
Totally her making the paint.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take let's say 15 minutes. Is that good? So
Sure.
20 to 37. So we're back at 37.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, 37. Okay, I want to go back to Tia's comment and what we were talking about just before we took a break, because there's something I want to underline here about the relationality that we're talking about. And I want to think about it through Paul's example, about the relationality that artist had with the rock material and transforming it into paint. Because that is, to use Deleuze and Guattari's language, it's a kind of transcoding that's happening, where there's a relationality between the artist and rock material in a kind of perceptual world, and that there's a process of art is the making process that transforms the rock material into the paint material. And that is the relationality that we're talking about, the transcoding. And when we're talking about the kind of cinema work that I'm showing you, there's to go back to the article from last week, in the later part of the article, if you got to that point where they're talking about territoriality and the territory. Deleuze and Guattari, if you want to read more about their thinking around territoriality, there's a great chapter in 1,000 Plateaus, their book called 1,000 Plateaus, that's titled The Refrain. And in the chapter on the refrain, they spend a lot of time exploring language around what they call coming up with, like, what is basically, if you can put it this way, what is our relationship to things, and what is that interaction all about, and what is the process where we produce refrains. And they begin to spell out this idea of what they call refrain, and it has to do with rhythms. And the rhythms are in relation to, the rhythms are themselves produced on top of something else. So there's this kind of on top of something else that is occurring. In my practice, I'm entering into a kind of rhythm. Washboard Hank's life is a kind of rhythm. And this is the musical, like, even if I'm making a film that's not about music, it is musical for me because life has a rhythm. And my practice starts by entering into that rhythm. And then in the process of that, trying to, with the camera, transcode or like make codes of that rhythmic material, and to use those blocks of sensation in time as the beginning of the film. And that the film, I see the film as a creative thing, right? It's something that is not representing, to go back to what Soledad was saying, it's not something that is representing what has happened. It's something that seeks to produce a kind of rhythm that will turn itself, the film, into something, into the kind of the territory that then invites a viewer to enter in. So there's a kind of like transcoding and coding and like breaking it up and becoming something else and becoming something else and becoming something else. That is the movement of living. That's the movement of living. And there's something it's something about getting inside the movement of living, and then seeing this process is like getting inside the movement of living. that is important. It's not as if I make the film and the film that exists and then creativity stops. I'm a conduit for creativity. You know, I make the film so that other things can happen, so that other viewers enter into that rhythm and then do something else. They for those people that enter into that rhythm, they become something else. Which is why at the end of the article last week, it boils down to Deleuze and Guattari about becoming, right? It's a long way from the plane of materiality to the plane of composition, from the plane of composition to territoriality, and from territoriality to ultimately it's something else. So you can think of the finished film as then becoming a kind of plane of materiality for something else, for another kind of plane of composition, if you will. Music. Oh yes. Oh, absolutely, Tia. Similar to music making. That's why Deleuze and Guattari don't distinguish in that article from last week between any art forms. It's very important for me that they don't distinguish between any art forms. This is something that, for the historically minded amongst us, the idea of even breaking the arts into music and drama and theater and poetry and painting, that in human existence is a fairly recent phenomena, made accelerated by Western thought developing as recently as the 18th century. So there is a kind of reconstitution, I think that's happening in that chapter, and something that I think is also important in the chapter that I selected for this week when we're talking about intuition, because it again doesn't talk about cinema explicitly or doesn't talk about music explicitly. It talks about what she calls the way, and she tries to get away from talking about art and tries to think about it in terms of the way. And for anybody that's been watching The Mandalorian on Disney, if you have, The Mandalorian always say that this is the way. When they're asked something, they say this is the way. And that's kind of what Aaron is getting at with art as the way. It's a practice, and it's the practice of it is really important in and of itself. It's the practice that gets us into the rhythms, into the milieu of our existence, and then makes it meaningful for us in particular ways, and then is meaningful for other people that resonate with that, that resonate in that way, the way, right? Whatever that is, which allows in a certain kind of mysticism to art practice, I think. But without all of the romantic trappings of mysticism, if that makes sense to you. Manning says on page 47, which is the second page of the reading, duration is lived only at its edges, in its commingling with actual experience. In the time of the event, what is known is not outside of the event. It is the mobility of experience itself, experience in the making. To actually measure the time of the event, a back-gridding activity is necessary. Such a reconstruction after the fact tends to deplete the event time of its middling, deactivating the relational movement that was precisely event time's force. Backgridding experience is reconceived in its porous state, out of movement. And this short paragraph does a lot of philosophical work and actually takes on Plato and the idea of the law of forms directly. So for Plato, which has informed so much Western thinking to the present, that Plato's allegory of the cave, where the people looking at the shadows on the wall are not looking at reality, and it's the philosopher's job to tell people what reality is. And for the philosophers, they understand as the law of forms, these eternal things that can, that life is a pale representation of, that can then be explained. Well, this kind of thinking is trying to get rid of that kind of foundational idea that there are these fixed things, that life is actually in the flow of time. And she says in the next paragraph, out of movement is out of act. For Whitehead, all experience is in act, variously commingling with the limits of the not yet and the will have been. Experience is in movement. Anything that stands still, an object, a form, a being, is an abstraction in the most common notion of the term. It's an abstraction from experience. Such abstractions are not the image of the past. The past cannot be differentiated from the in-act of the future presenting, but ahistorical cutouts from a durational field already on its way. Time cannot be held, and with its movement, everything changes in kind. What cinema allows us to do, and particular kinds of philosophical writing, but I'm not a philosopher, I'm a filmmaker, so I'm interested in, and a musicologist, so I'm interested in that process. I'm interested in, if I was to say I was an ethnographer, I consider myself more of an ethnographer of time and movement than an ethnographer of a particular location, particular people, and particular culture. I'm interested in the way that cinema can, the process of making cinema can get into rhythm with a kind of world, with worldings. And I don't mean worlding in any kind of metaphorical way. People are worlding, and that worlding is becoming, and that is their life. And my process is to try to hook up to that worlding and to try to create something that invites other people to try to world in that way. So, Paul, you watched somebody turn rock into paint, and you told us the story of turning rock into paint. And now the process of turning rock in the paint is rolling around in my mind, and I am resonating with that process and thinking about it as the way. That kind of continuation of practice in time, and the complex ways that we hook up to those rhythms and then can move those rhythms in time for other people to move with those rhythms in time is a different way of thinking than the idea of the film as a representation of something that happened in the past and as a fixed thing that sits in time. It doesn't, it never has, it won't, it can't, it doesn't do that. And to think of it in representation means to do something ahistorical, and it means to turn what is happening in the film into an abstraction of something else, and not into the experience of being in rhythm with the film as it's happening. Yeah, right.
I'm getting bit by bit.
Yeah, well,
And one other thing.
yes.
You are a philosopher. You may want to deny it, but like, if I was going to do a little short film on you, the word philosophy would come out. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I think if we go to page 50, Manning introduces at the very top, the second sentence, she says, technicity, the outdoing of technique that makes the more than of experience felt. Erin doesn't really get into technicity too much in the article. She just kind of puts it out there, and she makes a distinction between technique and technicity. And my reading of this is technique is a kind of is a thing, maybe a move. Technicity is a way of being through the technology, of the way of enacting technique in the process of moving something from the plane of materiality to the plane of composition. So And in technicity, I find technicity a way of articulating, to put into language, the process of thinking through cinema. I'm just going to make sure Barley's not attacking the mailman.
I love Burley. Does anyone else love Burley? Great name.
Yeah, boy. So, okay, everything's fine. No mailman was hurt in the process of making this workshop. Technicity. If we go down to the second full paragraph, starts with a memory. A memory of the future makes felt the smallest vibrational intervals, human and non-human, that lurk at the interstices of experience. This is really important in Aaron's work, the idea of the memory of the future. And I intuitively know what Aaron means by the memory of the future, and I'm certain that you do as well. It's the process that it's what occurs when you're engaged in an art practice and thinking about the coding process that you're involved with and what's going to come in the future. It's the process. I know, pal, but I'm doing this thing that they're here for, and we need to do that first, and then we'll go out and play later. Okay. So we just need to be chill for right now. I know it's frustrating, but we can do it. Okay. Okay. It's memory of the future is the process of selecting the rock, Paul. It's the process of deciding to hit record when you do. It's the already thinking that is informed by technicity. It's what Aaron means by all of this is what Aaron means by intuition. Like, intuition is not something that's an unformed instinct. Intuition is something that is developed through our practice, and our practice is in relation to we don't film ideas, but with ideas. Yeah, and perhaps even through ideas, like entangled with all kinds of not quite yet formed materials that are in the process of formation. And it's in the process of formation that Deleuze and Guattari locate thinking. It's the thinking is the intuition moving through time that's informed by this technicity. And it's the interstices, the human and the non-human. And that's what I wanted to get at in that shot in the Washboard Hank film, where that lovely woman is building the washboard. And I asked if I could film her build the washboard, and she was all kind of shy about it. And I just stood back and watched her build this washboard, like absolutely astonished at how fast she did it, and then turned this washboard around, thinking that this was a machine that was designed to wash clothes. And now it exists because it's a machine to make music. A machine that has long past its primary purpose. And this washboard company is able to exist because, as you would see in the rest of the film, they're a part of a washboard festival that happens every year in this little town. And it's the washboard festival that keeps this washboard factory alive, making musical washboards. The idea of making music with a washboard is not just a fact, but it's a relational field that makes the festival possible, that makes the factory possible, that makes Washboard Hank understandable to us. And it's that rhythm that produces this territory that that has all of these component parts and then brings all of these hundreds of people to converge on this little tiny town once a year, and then create this festival. Like that's the kind of complex refrains that we're talking about, and getting into that vibrational field so that we can see the interstices between the human, the non-human, and the human, all of the movements, that the rhythmic movements that the washboard builder puts into her work to produce this thing that then continues to move on into the world and have all of these consequences. What we're doing as filmmakers is doing precisely the same thing as what that washboard maker does. Is she takes those raw materials from the plane of materiality and then forms a washboard. Those materials move into the plane of composition, and then they become a plane of materiality for Hank and all of the other washboard players. And all of the washboard players become the plane of materiality for the festival. And then the festival becomes a plane of materiality for the touring circuits that those musicians hook up to because of the festival. And then, you know, it moves on and moves on and moves on. So the washboard, the making of the washboard is not a tiny fact. It's actually, the making of the washboard becomes the first code in this film, the first composition that makes all the rest of the composition possible, including Hank's life, which is extraordinary. So for Hank, the washboard is the way. And that way, the way is the rest of that process that we see in the rest of the film. Is that cool? Yeah. So I hope Bruce, that we've gone some way at making this language a little less alien and a little less antagonistic. You know, it takes time to kind of sit with and work through, but I think that once we start getting at least what these philosophers are trying to do to introduce movement into thought, then it becomes, I think, incredibly humane language, and it becomes incredibly, I think it has the potential to be a very ethical language that allows us to move to see life in motion and like affirm life instead of just abstracting and cutting out. And then hopefully gives us direction to move beyond just our human focuses and begin to have some sort of ethics of practice around other things like washboards and wood.
Now, I'm busy sort of translating it into my own terms, you know, which are a little bit simpler. And I had a really interesting experience in the last week. You suggested we just film something. So I filmed a little thing, and I had an aha moment while I was doing it that I didn't expect it at all. So and then I put some music to it, and I had some bunch of technical problems. And I had a bunch of insights that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't done it. And that's what's really exciting for me, was I learned more, I think, from doing it than like thinking about the processes. So that probably says more about me than about anything else, but I thought it was like really important.
Yeah, I'm gonna resonate with you on that, because I had read some of this stuff. Like I read Deleuze and Guattari as a graduate student, and I was intellectually amused by it, and I thought it was kind of cool. And then I went out and did ethnography on music festivals in Western Canada, and then I pretty much took this book with me, and in the process of doing that, I don't want to say that I noticed things that I wouldn't have noticed, but I think I noticed things that I wouldn't have noticed. And the significance of those noticings, I think, were maybe pre-authorized in a way, like it kind of softened or prepared my perception. And that was an important lesson for me, and something that I try to do in these workshops, to start with the philosophical reading, to try to soften the ground, I guess, so that we can be better able maybe to have those experiences and recognize the importance of them. So cool. Okay, page 51. The second paragraph. The signs of art do not convey meaning. They make felt its ineffability. The essential, the creative sign that does not represent, is a species of time, a durational fold in experience. Its quality of time cannot be abstracted from its coming into formation. And it's the coming into formation that I think cinema does a good bit to help. And I think why Deleuze was inspired by cinema to move back to philosophy. And I don't think we have to follow him back to philosophy unless we have to write a dissertation or write papers, and which I do, and perhaps many of you will. And it's that folding it back from the experience that you had back into your theoretical work, to try to also keep your theoretical work in motion, that I think is the important lesson to take from this. The next paragraph. A plurality of time in time multiplies experiences in the now. This, Deleuze suggests, is what art can do. Art not as the form an object takes, but as the manner in which time is composed. Time, as the force of the differential, has effects. It creates a compositional matrix that transversalizes the act and the inact. In time, in the art of time, what is activated is not a subject or an object, but a field of expression through which a different quality of experience can be crafted. And I think that goes back directly to Tia's question, and Soledad's contribution, and the way we're thinking about relationality. At the end of that paragraph, intuition in its amplification of the technicity of a process, that's our way of making cinema, in its capacity to think the more than as memory of the future, forecasts what Deleuze calls an original time, which surmounts its series and its dimensions, a complicated time, deployed and developed, a time devoid of perceptions, a time that makes its own way. Turning into the art of time involves crafting techniques that open art to its minor gestures. It requires an attentiveness to the field in its formation. This attention is ecological, collective in the event. It's relational, relation here understood as the force that makes felt the how of time as it co-composes with the experience in the making. It is out of relation that the solitary is crafted, not the other way around. Relation is what an object, a subject, is made of. So in the washboard Hank scene, thinking relationally, what I wanted, what I was attuned to, what I was interested in when I went on the road with Hank, is what is the relationalities? What are the relationalities that it makes Hank's performance, makes Hank's life as a washboard player possible? And going to the only shot I had planned, and I hoped would happen, was seeing a washboard built, because I really wanted to see a washboard built, because it seemed to me like that was the cell, the first germ, right? The seed. It was in the process of doing that and shooting that the rest of those relations began to emerge. And that was something that I didn't count on, and something that I didn't plan on necessarily, but I had that first idea. And that first idea was the washboard process. The rest of the relationality, our shooting around it, was a consequence of my intuition already tuned to the relationality. So like having Hank perform under the washboard, outside the washboard place in Logan, the washboard company. That emerged as something that I thought was important, his relation to the factory. So that was a planned shot, and you know, was planned for, you know, the memory of the future. I wanted you to see that. But then what happened afterwards was not planned, and it just emerged. And then putting all of those shots together, mixing the time pressure shot, which gives you a sense that as the viewer, it gives you an opportunity to watch Hank's body move through time space. And it produces an opportunity for you to build the relations between him performing on the street, to him performing at that kind of monument, to him moving into relation with a new set of people. And that set of shots that are sometimes continuity shots, sometimes time pressure shots, that produces the textures of experience that I want to communicate to you, right? So this is what we want to be prepared for when we move to the technology, which we're going to do now. Does anybody have any questions about the reading before we do that?
Sorry, who is the author of the reading? I think I missed that because in the article I can't see it.
Right, here it is.
The information was also in the email. So
I didn't receive the email.
Oh,
Last time I did receive it, but this time I didn't receive it. That was, yes. Okay.
Sorry, Pat.
You can check later, but
yes, please put your email address in the chat if you like, and I will add it because that was the list I received from the website colleagues. Maybe I didn't receive your email. Okay, thank you.
Great. So what we now have is we have intuition, we have the way, we have the plane of material, the plane of composition, and we have the refrain, we have technicity. You know, we have a growing list of technical terms that we can use to kind of articulate what it is that we're on about when we're exploring things. So let's now go to think about technicity. So I'm going to, I've shared the opening screen for DaVinci. You can see it. Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, great. So I'm just going to walk through the setting up of the editor, and I'm going to do this while I comment on it. It's very straightforward. So we're going to set up a new project. Okay. I'm just going to move, I'm going to move you to a different screen. Yeah, and then I'm going to share this. Okay. Okay, great. So you can now see the opening screen. Let's look at the bottom. Right at the bottom, you see these different tabs. So these tabs open us into different aspects of the process. And the tabs that we're going to be interested in are the media tab, the edit tab, the color tab, Fairlight, which is the audio mixer, and the deliver tab, which is where we send the video out. This, you can think of this in terms of process. The media tab is where we bring in the content. The edit tab is where we manipulate the content. The color tab is when we color the content. The Fairlight tab is where we do the audio mixing. and the deliver. Shh, Barrels, it's okay, pal. Is where we export the film. Can you still hear me while Barley is barking, or does it cut off? Okay. Okay, so I have to move you around a little bit. There we go. Okay, so in the media tab, this is where we organize all of our content. The first step, when we go up at the top left corner, we have this media storage tab. This is where we bring in the content. I have currently this this hard drive attached to my computer, so it shows up as it's called Video Mobile. I'm going to use content that oh, Little Ones is here. See, I'm going to use content that that I haven't done anything with. It was actually kind of it's a bit of a experimental fashion show situation. Browse, it's okay. Browse, that's enough, okay? Yeah, I know, there's somebody, I know, but it's cool. They're allowed to be there. It's good, thank you. So we have these video clips. You saw that I clicked on them and all the content shows up here. What I can do is I can select from this content and put it in different folders. So if I had shot over a number of days, which I did in this anarchist erotica project, you would see different folders here. All these different folders. So when I'm shooting, if I'm shooting like documentary work and I'm shooting per day, when I download the content, I put them in a folder on my hard drive, just named per day. And then over here, master, if you hit control and click, you get this new bin option, and you can list the you just call it the same thing that you have. I just called it center day 1 because that's what I called this folder. And then I would just grab this folder and I would just drag it directly into this media window, and it would drop all that content. But I'm not going to do that because I don't need to for this project, because I only have one folder here, which is all these clips. I'm just going to grab all these clips. And to do that, I just clicked on the first one and then went to the bottom and clicked shift. I just hit shift and then clicked on the bottom one. And then just drag them into the window and boom, they're in the editor. Okay. And that's all I need to do at this point. They're all inside the editor. Now I can go to the edit window. And in the edit window, you have all of this content that you just pulled into the media window is now available in the editing window. For those of you who are familiar with digital editing, you know that it's what used to be called non-destructive editing. Non-destructive editing means that whatever I do to this clip, when I drag this clip into the timeline, which is just a matter of grabbing it and dropping it down to the timeline, whatever I do to that clip, it doesn't change the original file. So we are working in a virtual space now, which means you need to save your stuff a lot to make sure that nothing bad happens and you lose your work. Because every time you make a cut or change this clip in any way, you're actually creating metadata that is saved inside the system that then operates on the original media, but only at the final step. So everything is virtual, okay? So when you change this clip, you are not changing the clip that this refers to. Is that cool? That's what non-destructive editing is. So when you're in the editor, don't worry about playing around. You can always delete it and nothing will have changed in your original clip. So you can always go back to the original clip. So I just grabbed a clip randomly. I just want to hit play on this and see what it is.
What do you think is going to happen next?
Yeah, she did. She did gore on it for Halloween.
Right, I remember. This is a bit of a trippy. This was meant to be a kind of a trippy video when it was done. So I asked the participants every time I got close to them to kind of pause for a second to break the natural physical flows, their physical rhythms, to have this kind of standout, kind of strange ethereal moment. That's just hanging on to the gaze just a little bit longer to make things, to have a particular affect for you as you watch. I want to consider the audio here as a field recording or soundtrack. We're going to deal with that separately, as you're going to see in a moment. So the first thing that we were talking about is montage. So I'm going to grab a clip from here that's entirely different from this clip. Let's see what this looks like. Great. So let's say I like just that much of this clip. As you saw in the first clip, I just grabbed the entire clip and dragged it down into the timeline. Now, I'm only going to take this part of the clip right up to here. So I'm going to start here. On your keypad, when you're working in DaVinci, you can just hit the I key, which means in, and then scroll forward to here, which is where I want to end. And you just hit the O key, which is out, and it gives you just that much. And I'm just gonna take the image and not the sound. So if I grab up here and drag this into the timeline, I get the image and sound. If I grab from here, I just get the image. And if I grab from here, I just get the sound. That's a pretty cool feature. I'm just going to take the image. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a moment in this original clip. Let's say right there, where I want to place this clip. I could do two things. I could take the clip and then just put it on top, which is the easiest way to do it. But remember, the duration that's happening in the original clip is now going to be covered over with this duration, because those two durations are matching. But if I wanted to save this and I want to cut this and I want to keep the flow of movement happening in this timeline, I could hit the B key, and it gives me a blade tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a spot down here where I'm going to cut that. And if I hit the A tool, it gives me back the cursor. So the main keys that you're going to use a lot when you're editing is the B tool for the blade and the A tool for the cursor. See, when I hit B, the blade goes red, and I hit A, the cursor goes red. That's just a useful shortcut. You could also just click on the razor blade and click on the arrow. It's fine. Now that this is cut, I can just move this entire clip and move that in place, and then move this in place. And now we have a montage.
What do you think is going to happen next?
Yeah, she did.
So we've returned, we've returned to the flow of time. Now, let's say you decide after you do that, that that's not really that interesting or not what you wanted to do. And you want to tighten up this second half, this third shot. You can just drag, you just take your cursor, that's now the pointer tool, you just take it to the edge and you see the way it changes shape. What that shape change means is you're going to pull it to where the cursor is, and it just clicks lined up, and then you can just pull that back, and then we've tightened up that edit.
She did gore on it for Halloween.
All right. Now, I'm going to go back to my media pool because I want to find, I'm going to bring in some audio. I have bird sound here that I really like. That was in a different project. I want to take it into this project, but I want to put it in a different folder. So you see, I'm back to the media folder. Over here under the master, I'm just going to control click and I'll create a new bin just to keep it separate. And this is going to be music. And I'm going to put the bird song into that clip, into that space. I'm going to go back to the editing tab, and you see we have both all of the content and we have that newly created music content. I'm going to take that bird song and I'm going to put it on the timeline.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen next?
She did gore on it for Halloween.
Now I find the audio. I'm going to zoom in. You zoom in by using this little plus arrow. I find the audio comes in a little, it cuts off a little strong and comes in a little strong. So I'm just going to soften that a little bit. When you go to the edge of the audio track, you have your fade tool. So that fades it out. And then your fade tool to fade that back, fade the audio back in. That fade tool is exactly the same as the fade tools on the edges of the clip. So if I want to fade in this clip, I just grab the fade tool and I pull it, and that creates a fade.
What do you think is going to happen next?
She did gore on it for Halloween.
And let's say I want to end everything here. I just go to use my blade tool again, and then I cut that, and I just delete it. I'm going to use my blade tool again, and I'm going to cut the bird song, and I'm going to delete that, and I'm just going to put a fade out on the bird song. But I also want to fade this out, so I'm just going to grab it like that.
She did gore on it for Halloween.
You see that the audio came out kind of clunky, so I'm just going to fade that as well.
She did gore on it for Halloween.
Now I think that's pretty cool, but I want to have the bird song create a kind of territory that this action can emerge into. And I'm just going to I'm going to select all of that. I'm going to get rid of that fade out. I'm going to grab all of that and I'm going to move that a little bit because I just want to have bird song. I want a little bit more bird song. I want it to start there. I don't know why. Intuition. I'm going to fade that audio in. I wanted to start right there. Why? Because it feels like it needs to start right there.
What do you think is going to happen?
She did gore on it for Halloween.
And then I'm going to extend the bird song out and then fade it out.
She did gore on it for Halloween.
Okay. Now I want to put text on this. You go to the effects library and we have our titles. I just like taking this text plus, dropping that block in. You'll see we have that. As soon as we click, you see when we click on the image, we have all of this information over here. When we click on the text block, we get to just type in right here. So that's the title of our piece. Going to find a typeface and size. And I also want to fade this in and fade it out. Make that fade out a little longer. Okay. We have composed something. Any questions?
That's really nice software.
Yeah, it is really intuitive and it's really fast, and you can do really like I love technology, but I don't want to work for the technology. I want the technology to be able to allow me to compose in time. Like time, as you can tell, time and movement are really important to me, and anything that gets in the way of my flow breaks the flow. I find this software is pretty fast that way. Yeah.
Now I did just looked up a few minutes ago about DaVinci Resolve when we had a break, and it seems it's a bit heavy in resources. I've got an old Mac Pro, and I'm just wondering if it's going to be able to handle it, because I was just rendering something like a minute and a half, and it took me like a long time.
Right.
I was using ScreenFlow or something, so
right.
Yeah, so I'll just have to try it out and see, but I really like how intuitive it is.
Yeah, give it a shot. It may, their writing, their writing has, like, the software writing has become better and better over time. So it used to be not long ago that you needed a really fast computer to run DaVinci, but their writing, I think, has become better, and so more and more people can run the software to a certain extent. So yeah, give it a try, and then if it doesn't work, it's there, and you can the computers at your school will be able to run it. They'll be able to
need to get a new machine anyway.
Well, if you do, whatever you get is going to be fine.
Right. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, totally. But one thing to keep in mind, because it's a video editing software, if you think you're going to do a significant amount of video editing, make sure you get the fastest video processor that you can get if you're getting a new computer, because DaVinci works on the RAM that's in your video card. That's more important than the RAM that's in your computer, right? Video RAM and computational RAM are different. So the video DaVinci, because it's a video processor, it's a professional video, editing suite. It's important. Okay, so what I did there a couple of times was hit save. And you see up here where it says edited, when I hit save, that edited goes away. Every time you do something new, it's going to show up as edited. And I like to save a lot. And as Dad said, always put save. Absolutely. I should get a t-shirt that says that, always hit save. Okay, now
it doesn't have auto backup.
Well, it does, and you can turn it on, but I like to be able to unsave. I like to be able to delete things. So I go to a certain extent, and then and then it's like, yeah, I like this, then I hit save, so that if anything goes wrong, I can go back to this point, as opposed to something else. Yeah. Okay, so now this next step, when we go to color, is I'm going to guess that it's probably going to be the most counterintuitive process of the entire thing. So instead of trying to do that in today's workshop when we only have a half hour, the workshop is designed for us to look at coloring and mixing next week. Which is what I would prefer to do, and we'll have another reading. So all I wanted to do for this week is get up to this stage, and then I want to show you. I'm not going to teach you how this is done, but I'm just going to show you, just to get your head thinking. So I'll go through the particulars of this next time, but I just want you to see where we started versus where we can end up. Browse. So that's where we began. So depending on your, depending on the camera, depending on the way you shoot, the kind of files that you create when you shoot, you have an enormous amount of potential in the video file that can then draw out some of those percepts and offsets that we were talking about. So this is why it was important for me to start with this distinction between the plane of materiality and the plane of composition, because there's in the coloring there's an enormous process that really takes a lot of intuitive play to get the textures for the kind of images that we're interested in producing. So here, let's do the same thing here. So we're in coloring, and this is a much more natural looking shot. So which was just done under natural light. So I think it's probably going to be easier to get something that we're happy with.
What do you think is going to happen next?
Yeah. Okay, so this is where we started. Where we started, and this is where we end up.
Could that transformation process be shown linearly?
Could it be shown linearly?
Yeah, like so could you show that transformation happen over time, what you've done?
Oh, could you cut it into the process, you mean?
Yeah, could you show the gradations of like what you did, like just over time from the original to where you end up
In the finished film?
Yeah, could you show the transformation of the color?
You can, but the process is a little different.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, what you could do, in fact, is you could take you could go back to the editor, and you could let's try this. So you go here and you let's find a media pool. So here's our clip again from the media pool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move this. I'm gonna separate the I'm gonna separate the audio and the video. I'm gonna move this up here. And
yeah, I don't mean to sidetrack what you're doing, but
yeah, no, basically you would just go and get this clip again,
yeah,
and then put this clip underneath,
yeah,
and then
oh, all right, and then you just fade between the two.
And fade between them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and then you would do that. I would have to find that exact clip again.
Yeah, sure,
because,
I understand. Thank
yeah,
you.
that's just
She did.
it was something like that, and I would just take just the video, and let's just pretend that it's going to line up, because it's not going to. And that's already faded in. We're just going to shorten that up. So that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. But this is, yeah, one of those compositional things that you have to like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, that kind of Wizard of Oz thing, it goes into Technicolor. You could do that. You just have to go through the entire process and then come back to the beginning. And then so you can get to it, but you have, in order to get to it, you have to think of it kind of backwards to get to to get to what you want to do. So I'm going to stop sharing that so we can just have a chat.
I got to tell you, this as a kid, my dad took me out of school to see The Wizard of Oz, and I'd never seen a movie in color before. And we're sitting there, and it blew my mind when it changed to color. I mean, I didn't even know it was possible.
Yeah,
It's really it's interesting that you mentioned that particular thing.
well, it's like even I think people who even for people that grew up on on color, to see The Wizard of Oz and to see the impact of moving from a black and white world into a color world is impactful, I think. And I think it's
Well, all the more if you've never seen it. I hadn't.
I bet. Yeah, I bet. And I find being able to do the work ourselves, like to color. I think the process of coloring, and maybe it's because I was a musician first, and I was like, I would dabble with paint colors, but never a painter. But then like working in digital cinema and working with Da Vinci, which as you'll see, as you can see, there's a lot you can do. And there's a lot of tools. I'm only going to show you how to use a handful of them to get what you need to get to so that you have some control over the plane of composition, to help you with communicating what it is that you want to communicate. Every scene of every one of my films is colored, and it's the process. It's part of the process of composition for me. Do you have free sound banks to recommend? You know what? I don't. And if you have sound banks that you like, feel free to throw them up in the comments. So that I don't use sound banks too often. I before getting into cinema, I was actually like really taken by sound studies and into environment. I really like environmental recording, and I like environmental recording as part of my cinema practice. So I tend to do all my own sound recording, because when we're going back to thinking about the relationships that we have with the territories of the worlding practice that we're getting involved in, I like bringing an audio recorder with me and getting those sounds that were impactful for me, like the sounds of birds on this particular island. Like those birds on that island feel to me a particular way, and anybody that's visited that island will know the sounds of those birds because they're so noticeable. So you get a good quality recording of that and then use it. But there are instances, or like dog barking in the background, or those kinds of environmental sounds that you'll work in. And we'll talk a little bit about working in environmental sounds in our next workshop. But when you need sound banks, when you need sounds, there's a massive amount of free, pretty decent audio recording content on YouTube that you can just go to YouTube and then use YouTube to MP3 transcoder, which is also free, and you can just put the URL into the transcoder and it'll pop you out an MP3 that you can import into your editor. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what the situation is? I'm a bit worried about this, about being able to use commercial recordings as part of paper.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any any audio of me playing Dixieland as a kid, and it's now like a sort of New Orleans style music.
Yeah.
So if I want to get Louis Armstrong in there playing, what kind of trouble am I in?
Yeah. Well, it's not so much trouble as it is dealing with spiders. So
this is like for a dissertation, because that's a primary concern. Like I've got to figure out what I can use. There's music that influenced me that I like to put clips of.
Yep.
My own music wouldn't be a problem, but
yeah.
But just acknowledgement isn't enough, and I'm not sure whether I have to license it or not. So
well, it ultimately depends what you want to do with the recording. So because you're doing a dissertation project, we have educational fair use. So you can use whatever recordings you want for an educational fair use environment that's going to be used for your dissertation. If then you're going to plan on releasing releasing it for public consumption, there's two things to consider. The first is getting licenses. If you plan on doing something, you would definitely need licenses if you plan on ticketing anything, beyond showing it at the university. If you put it online, you also have there's basically the copyright. You see it on YouTube all the time. Yeah. Audio is silenced on this because of copyright infringement. Yeah. That usually happens more than anybody coming after you for copyright infringement. Yeah. But for Paul.
I was just going to say the DaVinci and the Filmic Pro that you talked about last week. Do they do the same thing, or is that Filmic Pro app just for with the camera?
Yeah, just for the camera. So the Filmic Pro app is to get more capacity out of your camera, so that you can control focus and you can control zoom and you can control the coloring. That we'll talk a little bit more about next week. And then DaVinci is for after you've taken the video and you've uploaded it to your computer, and then you use DaVinci and then import those files into the editor. So we're moving into the next phase.
So can you put that DaVinci onto an iPad? That's what I'm using here today. Or is that better to be put on like your laptop or?
Better to be put on your laptop. You can put iMovie on your iPad, which is fine. iMovie works fine if that's what you want to use. But if you're going to be using DaVinci, you need something a little bit more powerful, and you need. I don't think they've designed it yet for the iPad.
Okay, so you just go to it, download it. You sent us the link to that, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's freely available.
Great.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bruce.
I have a older version of Final Cut Pro that I used to stabilize an image when I was shooting something last week. So. But I'm thinking that it's Apple native. It might be a little more efficient. But do you have any thoughts on the preference of the two of them? Because I like DaVinci looks like really, really sweet in terms of its functionality.
Yeah, as far as functionality. As far as advanced functionality, particularly when we get into the coloring and audio and stuff, it's just so much more advanced.
DaVinci,
yeah, so much more advanced. And as far as as Toshio suggests, you can also use Adobe Premiere Rush for the iPad if you're into that. I am totally agnostic about what software you use. I'm just showing you how to use DaVinci because I think it has the benefit of being free, and it has the most tools, and pro level tools for a free software. And for those people who have learned to edit in Apple or Premiere or whatever, when you're in DaVinci, during the setup, it'll ask you what shortcuts you want to use, and you can use the shortcuts from any of the other softwares. So it's really made to be as easy as possible. But the mechanics, specifically the mechanics of coloring, because DaVinci was first and foremost a coloring tool for professional cinema. That's how it began. It's only in the last 6, 7, 8 years that it's become increasingly an editor, and only in the last handful of years that it's become a free and widely used editor for for the general population. So the coloring tools are beyond anything that's available anywhere in any other software, because it has been primarily a coloring tool. So that's ultimately what attracted me there in the first place, and that it has a pretty decent audio editor also was a big pro. So for me, there's a whole bunch of pros to this particular software, but ultimately many of them do the same thing, but just in different ways.
Do you mind to put a download link, because I found a whole bunch of them, like the Softonic and a whole bunch of other companies that are, when I Googled it, and I was just a little bit concerned about finding the official one so I don't get any add-on junk.
Yeah, totally. So the company is called Blackmagic Design.
Yeah, okay, I saw that one. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, good point. Here it is. Fantastic. Wanted to highlight one more thing in Aaron's reading before we take off. In the art of participation, so on page 53, after making the point that the individual is emergent and not pre-constituted, so that there's a relationship between what she calls individuation as a process, the pre-individual, which is what she calls the force of form, and the individual, the turning point that opens the process towards new individuations. So there's constantly this idea of this process where there's emergent stuff. She says halfway down the final paragraph, a process is thus by its very nature collective. It's an ecology of practices. An ecology of practices. Manning is very much about technique, as we were talking about technique and technicity, and an ecology of practice, which is an idea that she gets from Isabel Stengers. It's a way of thinking about this kind of collectivity of practice, that we are kind of in an ecology of practices, and this ecology of practices we are articulating in a particular way. And that articulation, as we go back to what Deleuze and Guattari were talking about last week, that particular thing is a way of thinking about style, and it's a way of thinking about the term agencement, or what I call, like, when it's translated as assemblage. So in our schedule, we go from the territorial assemblage to the production assemblage. We are now in the production assemblage. The way when we're talking about which technologies we use, I'm talking about this or you're talking about that, we're talking about producing an ecology of practices. A choice with a technology is a choice that will provide opportunities, and will make a contribution to the development of agencement in a particular way, So all of these kinds of things, like we're we're entering in an ecology of software. We're producing an ecology that includes software and technology, and that ecology of practices has the material component. And like not only is the film that we're making emergent, but so are we. And these are happening in an ecology. So there's no separation in that sense. It's always relationality. Marcia, you still here?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. We are at 3 minutes to the hour, to the end of things. So we're going to I'm going to see you again next Monday, and we're going to be talking about our ethical practices in this ecology. For Stangers, it is fundamental. The thinking about the ecology of practices is fundamentally about thinking about ethics. It's about thinking about the ethics of the the relationality, the ethics of there are at many levels.
Thank you, Michael. As I noted, we're having pretty major construction. I think the guy just took a coffee break, but it's been like, drill as loud as I can manage it. So I didn't want to be distracting. Thank you very much. And I'm going to suggest, just given the comments that I received too, people really appreciate it. And we're looking for that follow-up message that says, all right, this is what we did. Here are the resources that we discussed, right? And here's the thing for the next session next week. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I will endeavor to compose that by noon tomorrow. And maybe, I think now that we've gone through it first, though, one time, you think, Nassim, we could get it turned around by end of day tomorrow?
Sure. As soon as I receive the material from you, and if anyone didn't receive the email from last time, please email me. I put my email in the chat. For Soledad, I checked. You've been sent the email also. Please check. Maybe it was in your spam, but I did forward it again, so you should have received it again today. But anyone else, if there was any issue in receiving our last email, please let me know through my email.
Nassim, your email address just came to me.
Oh, sorry.
We were chatting about some administrative stuff. The other thing I needed to say is that I'm very sorry. I won't be able to join you next week because I am traveling with my family from Ontario to Cape Breton, where I will begin teaching again this fall. So it's going to be, we'll be on the road, and I just don't think that I'll be able to manage. But I'm really grateful that Michael is willing to allow us to share these videos on our the Center for Sound Community's YouTube channel, because then I'll be able to catch up. And it's also just to tip off everyone here that you can share with other people who are interested, that they can watch the videos there, catch up, join us in their own time. As well, you can check back, right, to revisit things that arose in the workshop. And I'll say I'm really interested by the dialogue and discussion. All of the participants are bringing such incredible perspectives and thought to the process. It's really wonderful to be a part of that, as well as, of course, being led through this in some very helpful ways with Michael's guidance and instruction. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It was really nice to see you again. And so that.
Michael, do you have any writings of you as a cineworlder, like about cineworlding instead of photographer?
Yeah, I do.
We should actually, Michael, make that available. If like Nassim, if you could please provide citations to a few pieces that Michael shares, and then as we're updating the website, Nassim, we would like to put those citations up there for people to revisit in the future. Okay, could you well,
Sure.
I'll just ask you to manage that with Daniel, the project manager. Thanks.
And I should also say that the Cineworlding website that was just, which it's just fairly new creation. I'm going to be building a bibliography. So I'm hoping to expand that, and well, I'm not hoping to. I will be expanding that.
And in the future, as Michael continues to develop resources, we'll keep sharing them as well. So you can just keep checking back whenever, but we'll just continue to post links and remind you to go to his site as it continues to grow.
Yeah, and if you want to, if you also, if you haven't already, you can follow me on Instagram. And that way we could be in touch, and we can share things. That'd be cool. I saw Paul actually created an Instagram account just to ask me a question about barley, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, and after that, I watched Unspittable. So anybody out there, if you haven't seen Michael's this film he did, this is a rather new one about this hip hop group. It's great. You got to fill us in sometime on where the career of those three guys has gone.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. We'll talk about that for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks everybody.
Everyone.
See you next week.
Next week.
Thank you,
Bye.
Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.